I'm at Quantel, and as you know, Quantel's been in the post game for a very long time, well respected, and typically does the highest of the highest end post-production workflows. So it's obviously a company I wanted to talk to about some of the emerging standards coming out. Now, I'll just talk about some that I've mentioned to before, and you've probably already heard from your customers and requests. One of those is the implementation of IMF. It's a very hot topic with the studios and Netflix, for example. And can you comment on where is Quantel on that standard, on the implementation of that?
I'll take that. Okay. I think the easiest way to support IMF for us at the moment is via EasyDCP. EasyDCP is something that we already implement for our DCP out, and they have recently implemented IMF as part of that. So IMF packaging is part of the EasyDCP API. Not decided yet, but that would probably be our best way forward to support.
So are you likely to integrate it into your finishing tool at a later date?
Yeah, well, we're already using, we already have our own UI with our own implementation of the DCP out API. So
you're using the EasyDCP SDK with your friend? Okay.
That's already integrated into our system, so it's just an easy step forward to support IMF in terms of that, yeah.
Has there been a lot of requests from your clients for IMF, or just trying to be ahead of the curve?
So far here at NAB, I've had 2 requests for it.
Okay, well I
think people are still thinking about it, still trying to consider.
Well, it's still very early, but it's impressive that I've heard quite a lot of talk about IMF. That's why I'm starting off with that today in the questioning. But we'll just move on from that, because I think people should follow up on that. But it's a very, very significant file management and version control issue and regional versioning sort of system. You've probably followed in other videos I've talked about that. But let's move into other things. I'll mention one other thing quickly, because you've got your developer here is VC5. Have you had a look into that format yet?
I'm not across that sort of the broadcast side of things.
Okay.
So, working.
It's probably it's not so much broadcast. It's more of the interesting part of VC5 is its compressed Bayer bitstream capabilities. But follow it up at some later stage, because I'm sure because one nice thing about VC5 and that it actually is it's like a standard for a Bayer compression file format, because no other standard exists for Bayer files. That's interesting, isn't it?
Yes.
So. It's a good thing to keep an eye on. Now we'll move on to, obviously, because I've seen on your booth, you're doing a lot of stuff in high dynamic range. So where's that coming from, and what have you found out so far in high dynamic range? Is it an easy step forward, like the transition to high dynamic range? What are we talking about? Replacing every television set, or is there an interim solution? Where's that going at the moment? Is there any nice knowledge that you can share with us based on, we know that you're playing with it, and you can give us an insight on where it's going?
Well, I think, there's lots of companies offering lots of different solutions, and we're looking at all the Dolby curves, and the PQ curves is now a SMPTE standard.
Yes.
The interesting bit, as you mentioned, is going to be the transition.
Yes.
And all these companies have solutions for that as well. We sort of can step out of that a little bit, because we don't have to deal with making televisions or.
That's right. You're really here just to supply the tools.
I think that people think that 4K is not enough.
Oh, really? Okay.
4K is not enough. We need to do something extra on top of that 4K, and I think high dynamic range is part of that, to set that next kind of level up there for not only post but also for the end user to be able to create something that leaps out of the screen. It's what customers want. They want something that's going to grab them, that's attention grabbing, and that's where HDR is being driven from. It's also, you've got people with monitors like Dolby, now got a proper Dolby Vision monitor that we were talking about over a year ago, so it's coming forward. We're showing Sony, the new Sony HDR monitor here on the stand within our VIP room, with Rec 20, almost a Rec 2020 color space on there.
20% Rec 2020. I've actually looked into it, or I've done a video on it. I'll be doing a video on that as well. It's very interesting, and it does look quite spectacular.
We have one next door, and we're feeding that Rec 2020 color space from Pablo Rio. So, grading to it. I think some of the challenges for us are working with different color spaces, because the dynamics of the color corrector change slightly, because you may have to S-curve and push everything up the top end there to be able to stretch it back out again. So the ballistics within the color corrector need to change a little bit as well.
That's right, and this is one of the reasons I'm sort of bringing this up, because I know you're not the only company playing with this. And do you find particular ideas on how to approach these problems and how to approach these new color spaces and the new wider peak, the higher peak whites, etc., have brought in problems that we haven't really faced before? And one of the things, like with SMPTE, is that still in SMPTE there's still a lot of things to be worked out, and comments from you that I make on these videos, I'm hoping will socialise some of the experience from high-end tier 1 companies like yourself to help those organisations move forward faster, because I'm quite excited about the high dynamic range, specifically the higher nits or the higher peak whites. They look really good. Really, the punchiness, etc. And I think that's like digital cinema version 2. That's what it's going to be, in my opinion. And it is the work from companies like Quantel contributing to that mind share of knowledge that will bring us to that digital cinema version 2. And so hopefully, with talking to you, all talking together a bit more with these tier 1 companies, that will come sooner, and at a, because if you contribute, your knowledge will contribute to a more practical and realistic result, right?
I think from our point of view, if you pick your high dynamic range curve, we can grade in it, and you can look at a grading monitor, and it all looks fantastic. But that's if you are only ever going to be in HDR. But it's this transition that is going to be the big hurdle, because there'll be people that want to watch it in standard dynamic range, and the decisions you made in the grading suite will be wrong for...
That is true, and to a degree that is the... from my experience studying this, you're correct. That is if anything, that's the biggest stumbling block getting us towards this. Because you're right, we need to utilise this high dynamic master data in other formats, because there are tens of millions, hundreds of millions of televisions already out there that are on 709.
So you have to make a choice of how you're going to remap.
That's right.
And I think Quantel's perspective at the moment, we can grade in HDR, and we're doing it next door, but that only works for HDR to HDR to HDR, and so I think our next step is we're very interested in which of these many companies is going to win, and then once that comes back, we can then sort of configure our outputs to support whatever plugin.
The challenges we have is really, you've got not quite a plethora, but you've got few decisions to make about which way you want to go in terms of what do you support for output. You can put effort into X, Y, Z. For example, I'm not going to mention any kind of company names here, but you need to be able to put the effort in, and some of them are easier to work with than others. Some of them you have to do development work to be able to support. Others are more kind of out of the box and easier to support. And so the pendulum's going to start swinging to one or the other. I mean, we've been talking to lots of post customers about what it is that they might want to be able to put in their suites, for example.
Well, that's very interesting.
And so we want to be able to take that on board and make a decision about that we're showing the Sony BVM X300, I think it is, the new but their new HDR monitor there. We've got discussions with Dolby coming up to see what we can do with those guys. So turn that off.
That's fine.
So we're waiting to find out. But I mean, in the meantime, we're supporting HDR output to the Sony monitor. We can have a discussion with Dolby.
And so your clients can come and have a look at where you are at that, and get recommendations from Quantel on. See, the big issue here is when's the moving point? If I was one of your clients, I'd be saying, well, when do I have to do something about this, right? And it's good to know that Quantel is on top of it, and they can come here and get practical understanding how it'll affect them. Would you say that that's the case?
In terms of moving, that's up to the customer. I would suggest now is a good time, mainly because you're going to get the jump on everybody else. It's about being able to offer an extra service to clients out there, to filmmakers, people who want to make content. They want people to watch it. They want a differentiator in that content to be able to grab people's attentions, and HDR is part of that. And of course the first person to get on the bandwagon is going to get the jump start on there and get in first. All
right then, well, I think we've covered everything I want to cover, but at the end of these I always let you guys say anything you want to cover that we haven't. For example, what's new with Quantel this NAB? Or like I find a number of companies like yours now are on progressive updates and don't bother waiting to NAB. We update them when they're ready. Is that how you're working these days?
We tend to have a fairly agile code development, so that we do bi-monthly releases for Pablo Rio. However, we do have some longer term projects. Some of the HDR stuff that we've been doing, which is scheduled for release in September this year. We're looking at doing a lot of that, so full 32-bit float along with high dynamic range native color space on disk, being able to support that color space or choice of on output, be it ACES, P3.
Well, actually, I forgot to mention ACES. How is ACES going for you? And have you been asked for it a lot? What's the story there with you and your position on ACES?
Yeah, lots of people are asking for ACES. People want to know the ACES workflow. How does Quantel fit into it? We are currently one of the ACES partners, so we support ACES color space on disk. We work with ACES color space. We can have ACES on output. We use manufacturer SDKs that support, say, like Sony F65, EXR support, Red.
So you're doing.
So they support ACES in their SDK.
Yeah, they supply ID, what's called IDTs or whatever.
They bring it. So the IDT is supplied by that.
Yeah.
We support that natively within Pablo Rio on disk, and can export as EXR with ACES color space and view with the correct ODT.
Yes.
As well.
Now, one thing in talking about ACES to other vendors is some of these companies have questioned the use of linear grading as opposed to logarithmic that we're used to in traditional grading. Have you found a similar request from your user base on how ACES is implemented in your your software?
Not from a perspective of the ballistics of color correction. We're fairly, because of the way in which we store our media on the disk and do our processing, we're fairly kind of agnostic. I know that there's other systems out there. Excuse me.
That's fine.
You might talk for a bit.
You're the user. You're the technical guy actually face to face with this.
Yeah.
Can you comment on that?
I think the difference between ACES is EXR scene linear. So there is a big difference between grading in scene linear, sort of video linear, which still has the burnt-in gamma, and then sort of logarithmic that you may get from DPX film media.
That's right.
And each one of those is a very different experience.
That's right. There's been different. I've talked to a number of people, and this is an interesting aspect of ACES, is that it's more about what you're brought up on, rather than the capabilities of the different way of working.
Yes.
And would you agree with that perspective?
Yeah, I think so, and I think it may be that even though your data, your video data, comes in as EXR files that are scene linear.
Yes.
It might be more natural for your color corrector to act as if it were video.
That's yes, or in
so
a logarithm, like a film.
Or film,
yeah,
if you come from a film background.
That's right.
Because one of the things we are already noticing is that our Pablo panel, you've got the rings and the balls. If you are in an ACES color space mode, red is not naturally where red would be on Rec 709.
Yes.
And things it feels different.
That's right.
And so that's why, as part of the ACES, the ability to reverse the ODT, is useful in that we can then take the input from the balls, reverse that through the OVT.
Okay, it's clever.
Yes. Into ACESv land,
yes.
So that when I move the ball in red, it feels like red.
That's right. Yeah, I'm following you, and I see it's a clever way to approach it because.
And although we haven't really considered the same sort of scene linear video logarithmic, a similar approach so you could have your panel feel natural to you.
That's very good, and one of the things I've been talking to about a lot of companies like yours is that an important aspect of these standards is it's not just that the standards exist, it's how the particular vendors approach the interface or the implementation of these standards, and it is those choices which actually typically give one vendor an edge over another. And how you looked at it right now is actually a very interesting way to look at that, because it's a universal way of looking at it in terms of you want it, here's a switch, turn it on or off. Yeah. It's easy. It's user preference. It's a user preference. It's not baked into the way that you implemented into the software. So really interesting. Thanks for the input. And one of the reasons I want to talk about this is ACES is a complex issue, and the more we get informed about it, the more socialised the information is about it, the more confidence I hope we will get people moving forward into ACES. So I think thanks a lot for your input. I think that's a long enough video for now. Thank you very much, Damon. Okay. And Ben, wasn't it?
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James.
That's James Garner, CineTechGeek at Quantel, NAB 2015. Bye for now.